You're listening to the Resilient Author Podcast, the show that goes beyond the pages to explore the grit, courage, and resilience it takes to write and publish a book. I'm your host, Carrie Human, and each week I sit down with authors to uncover the stories behind their stories, the challenges they faced, the breakthroughs they experienced, and the wisdom they've gained along the way. Whether you're working on your first chapter or celebrating your launch, this is the place to find inspiration and practical takeaways for your own author journey. Let's dive in. Who may not know who you are yet, what's your book about, and what do you hope readers take away from it?
Well, I was so attracted to your podcast because of the title, The Resilient Author. I can't say that I ever thought of myself as resilient, but when I saw that, I thought, I got to get in touch with this guy because um, the book that I'm currently have out there that was released in September of 2024, so it's a little over a year old. It's called Higher Powered, and that's where my resilience comes from. And the reason that I love this book the most of everything probably that I've ever written is that it is what happened was I was in seminary and I wrote a master's thesis, and which you have to do. It's part of, completing that, the master's. And when I was finished with it, I did that to get an A. I was really passionate about what I was writing about, but at the same time, I really wanted to get an A. That was the whole gist behind it. And when I graduated and I finished that, I knew it wasn't finished. I knew there was so much more to say about it. And so I just spent, and this is the resilient part. I did things that I never would have done before. Like I went to my boss and I said, I can't write on the weekends. I just don't have enough time to do it, to really put to it as I need to put the time and energy to it. And I said, is there any way that I could work maybe 4 10-hour days and have a day off each week so that I have a day at my house where my husband's at work and I have nothing else that I have to do? And I had nobody around me was doing this at the time. And my boss said, you know what? I have no idea, but let me ask HR. And she took it to HR and they said yes. I had been an employee there at that point for about 20 years. And so, I was a loyal employee who always showed up, always got her job done. And they said, let's see how it works. And not long after that, they created oh gosh, I can't remember the language for it, but an HR policy where if you wanted to do some kind of work shift like that, as long as you got your 40 hours in per week, and it got okayed by your boss and everything, that you could do it. And it just, that's not something I ever would have done before. And I think the things that I wrote about in this book, it is about dying to yourself. It is about what I've termed personal eschatology. Eschatology is, for people who don't know, it's the study of the end times or the end of things. It's kind of a scary thing to think about, it's apocalyptic, is the word that you often hear associated with it. And I grew up in fear of it my whole life because I grew up in the church and I grew up in sort of a fire and brimstone-y kind of message, that you're going to burn in hell. And that's the end of the world, is when Jesus comes down and, he puts the bad people over here and the good people over there, and he takes the good people and the bad people are basically screwed. And for the most part, I felt really bad growing up. My dad was a minister and he was also an alcoholic, and I was the youngest of 4. And at one point when I was young, he told me that I was a mistake. And so I just took that as God telling me I wasn't supposed to be here. Therefore, in my mind, I was bad. And so I was going to end up with those people who were thrown into the fire. And so I spent my whole life being terrified of the end of times. And, there's horrible B-rated movies about it, and even some better movies about it. Um, and it never ends well for people who go in the fire, you know? And so this idea that I came up with while I was in seminary and I was learning all kinds of different ideas and academic theologies about what Jesus may have been saying here and there and everywhere. And I learned how much he speaks or spoke in metaphor, in symbol, in parable. And lots of people may have already known about that, but I had sort of the Sunday school understanding of things when I got there. And I started to think about it and I thought, what if when Jesus was talking about his second coming, he actually meant he was going to come for each one of us, singular. I'm going to come back for you, and your life is going to end completely in order to follow me. And the reason that this really struck gold for me was because at the time that I entered seminary, I was 15 years sober. And so I had my own addictions that I was recovering from, and my life was an absolute 180. Like if you had known me in my addictions when I was actively using alcohol and food and running after men the way that I was and I mean, I was addicted to everything. But those two were the biggies, food and alcohol. And if you'd have known me then, and then you knew me when I walked into seminary, is a completely different person. And so when I started to think about this, because I'm accepting Jesus and I'm following this path, even though it's going to cost me money, I don't have, I'm going to have these horrible bills but I'm running after it because this is where I'm being led. And, I'm not sure this is answering your question, but the basic gist of what I'm trying to say here is that the resilience that I have received from following Jesus is what I talk about in the book, because it is a continual dying to self over time. Once I put down the alcohol and the food, then I had to put down all those defects of character and all that chaos that I was causing because of my addiction. And then when those things were put down, then I have to put down more of myself in regards to selfish desires, self-seeking, selfish behaviors, all those things. And so I'll just stop there and see if I answered your question.
You
And
did.
then
No,
we can go on from there.
you unpacked a lot, and I really appreciate that. You were just talking earlier about just being a kid and being told like if you're bad, you're gonna essentially burn in hell. Like you said, like what a terrifying thought for a kid to have, and just to have that lurking over your shoulder throughout life. Like it, yeah, I felt that, and I know a lot of us felt that. It's not ideal. Um,
No.
but I am curious. When so you mentioned being in recovery. You mentioned Christ coming into your life. Like when did you know like this story had to be told? Like it wasn't just an idea anymore, but like you knew that you had to write this book. Like what was that process?
Interestingly enough, I thought about writing. I've been a writer since Mrs. Gehrig made me write a poem in fourth grade. I mean, we all had to write a poem, and it was a ridiculous poem that I wrote, but I mean, it got the bug started. So I've been thinking about writing really my story, everything my whole life. But I always got in the way.
Mm,
My victimhood, growing up in the setting that I talked about is very abusive. So I, played the victim for a very long time, and I got in the way of telling the story. And and then when I got into early recovery, I was also guided. Not everybody who is recovering from addictions needs help from a counselor. But I definitely did. There was a lot of childhood trauma to unpack and get rid of. And so while I was doing that, I really couldn't think of doing anything else. Um, but when I started to get clean and I recognized, or like had more significant time clean, I recognized that there was so much more I was being pulled to learn. And that's when I followed and went to seminary. And when I wrote my thesis, I was graduating in 2020, in May of 2020. I don't know if you remember what was going on in the spring of 2020. Most people do. But I was so, pardon my French, I was so pissed because I worked full time while I was getting my master's degree. And so I had spent 6 years in part-time schooling while I was working full time. And this was pre Zoom. This was pre everything can be online. I mean, some things were online, but I was driving an hour and 15 minutes to my classes, working crazy hours to get my hours in, all that stuff, just like going above and beyond. And my graduation day was taken away. And I know that sounds, just saying it just like that right now sounds so selfish because the world was crumbling, right? The world was crumbling around us. And all I could think about was my graduation day is taken away after 6 years of hard work. I don't get to be noticed and recognized and all that stuff. And it actually, it put me into a bit of a spiral. And it was amazing because it was like a 48-hour period where I just hated myself so much because I recognized pretty quickly what was happening. And I knew in that time something needed to change still. There was something in me that was really still not okay. And I don't know if you've ever seen the show, The Chosen. Have you ever seen that show or heard about it?
Yeah, it's really good.
Well, it had just come out I think it was the fall of 2019. A couple people had told me about it, but I was busy with school and, I didn't have time for it. Well, now I'm graduated and I have all kinds of time because the world is closed down, and they decided to make the show free. And they made it like a pay it forward thing right at that time because of the pandemic. And I thought to myself, what the heck? I got nothing else to do. You know, well, I started watching that and I thought to myself, this is the Jesus that I want to talk about. This is the guy that I have known my whole life that has always, even in my darkest moments when I really hated God, because I really thought God was doing this to me, putting me in this family, putting, the whole thing. But I always identified with Jesus because this is going to sound a little crazy, but Jesus's father abandoned him just like my dad abandoned me. That was the crazy, diseased thinking in my head, but it kept me connected. And when I met the Jesus in The Chosen, I knew this is the guy I've known my whole life, because anybody who's watched that show knows he's just he's just so beautifully portrays the human divine together. It's beautifully done. And I've seen a lot of people play Jesus. Jim Caviezel also did a wonderful job. But it just really made me recognize I need to write more about this relationship. And so that's what started me taking the thesis and turning it into a book. And then it just sort of, I got in touch with my former thesis advisor who had just retired. And I said to him, would you be willing to read my chapters as I write them? And he was all for it. So I mean, he was on board and I was sending my chapters to him. And that's when I talked to my boss and asked, for this special time to do the writing. And I knew it had to happen. And as I was writing it, I was recognizing how much I have died to over this time in myself that needed to die in order to truly follow where Jesus was leading me. And I couldn't really do that until I completed the book, which was about 2022. So it took me about 2 years to do that and then let it all go. It took another 2 years to find a publisher who was willing to pick it up. That's a brutal process, In those 2 years, a lot more happened in my relationship, and actually going back to church, going back to organized religion and being baptized. And that's when, because I was baptized as a baby. My parents had me baptized, but I didn't feel like I had made that choice. That wasn't like, I wasn't saying, I give my life to Jesus. My parents were saying, we're giving her life to Jesus. It's to me, it wasn't the same thing. And the church my husband and I joined, that I went to the pastor and I told him that I had had this desire for a while, but I never followed through on it because I thought it sounded silly or whatever. And he was like, well, this is why we do adult baptisms here. So I'm so glad you're here. And I was baptized in the summer of 2024, and then the book was published. And it's just like, it all sort of happened at the same time. It was like Jesus was like, okay, we're all in the deep end together now.
Interesting. It's interesting you mentioned that. I was talking to a friend not too long ago, and I want to ask, when you left organized religion, like, did you ever feel like you had to abandon your faith altogether, or like, do you feel like that decision sort of opened the door to like a more personal, authentic relationship with Christ, or whatever you were
Yeah.
doing at that time?
Yeah. It actually, well, it opened the door for a lot of things at first, which were not great. That exploration became a lot of alcohol and partying and just self-degradation. Okay. So it does open, I mean, it took me away from the rules, and the oversight from my dad, and I was only 18, so I went to college and I never went back to church. When I did go back to church, in those in that period of time when I was not a member of a church, my sister, my one sister invited me to, she was going to a Catholic mass on occasion because she just liked it. And she invited me to go with her. I could not stop crying the whole time I was in there. Like, I just felt so unworthy. Um, like, I can't be in here. This is not okay. There's something really wrong. I can't be here. And I just never went back. And I would go to church for like weddings and funerals and that kind of stuff, but that was it. And an occasional Christmas Eve here or there, if someone wanted to go that I knew. But I always, like I said, I always was connected with Jesus. I never stopped communicating with Jesus. I was really angry at God. I told God off a lot in my drunkenness. But one of the things that came back to me when I was in my first year of seminary was I had had an encounter with Jesus where I had been at a party, and I went outside of the party. This was about a year or so after college. I left the party to smoke a cigarette, and it was really cold, like January, Pennsylvania cold, which is brutal, right? And nobody wanted to go outside and have a cigarette with me. So I was all by myself, and I was standing there, and the sky was just gorgeous with millions of stars. And I was so angry. I was a year after college. All my friends are getting married. I don't even have a boyfriend. Like, I mean, my life is just a mess. I'm living at home. I mean, it was horrible. And so I just started yelling at God. And I'm standing there smoking this cigarette, yelling at God and telling him off. And all of a sudden I remember saying, I don't remember a lot of what I said, but I do remember saying, when is it my turn? When are you going to do something for me? You know, I was such a brat, I was such a brat. And I remember feeling this like warmth in the middle of this cold moment. This warmth came over me, and I knew with every ounce of my being that if I turned to my left, Jesus was standing right there. Not ghost Jesus, not spirit Jesus, like physical Jesus was standing right there, waiting to hug me. He heard me and he came to me. And for a moment, I had peace, and then it turned to like terror,
Hmm.
because I went right to I'm going to be thrown in hell right now.
Mm,
And I ran back into the party.
mm,
And I repressed that memory or just would not allow myself to think about it until literally when I was sitting in my Intro to New Testament class and I had this idea about personal eschatology. I remembered it and I thought, that's what that was. He was coming to me. He was coming back for me. And he wanted to tell me my whole life had to change. I had to die to myself. And I couldn't, whether or not he communicated that to me in that moment, I couldn't remember. He may have, but it scared me so much that I ran away from him in the moment.
mm,
And but what I saw happen over those years, the years following that moment, which was, like I said, about a year or so after college until I got into recovery, was about 5 or 6 years. And those years, I had no communication with Jesus. I had no connection. It was so dark and dismal, and I was suicidal. I mean, it was the darkest my life has ever been. And when I was remembering all of this in my class, I was thinking of, Jesus saying there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth for those who do not follow.
mm.
And I was like, that's what that time was. It was horrible. The separation that I felt during that time was unbearable. It wasn't that I didn't believe in God. I just felt nothing. Like it was just an absolute, I don't even want to say emptiness because that actually describes something. Like I can't even describe how horrible it was. So I never stopped believing, but there was that time when I got to recovery, what they told me was, you have to have a higher power.
Mm,
It doesn't have to be anything that we tell you it is, but you have to have a higher power. And when I first started in recovery, it was the group of people. Whenever anybody said the word God, I thought of the words in capitals, God, good, orderly direction.
mm,
So my higher power became good, orderly direction. So that meant I needed to call somebody and ask for some good, orderly direction whenever anything came up, that kind of thing. So I couldn't even pray at first because I was afraid, and thankfully I had people guiding me who kind of really pushed me to go there. And they said, look, I haven't been struck by lightning. So you're not going to be struck by lightning. Just start praying. It doesn't have to be the God of your childhood. Just start praying and spirit will guide you.
mm.
And that's exactly what happened.
I really like the God acronym, good orderly direction. You've mentioned a couple times now being in recovery for, multiple addictions. I'm just curious. I've been in recovery for a while myself. In those early years, where you talked about like the word empty described something, like it was more than that. Like how did you keep yourself from picking up, some of those old bad habits, relapsing, or if you relapse, how'd you get back? Like how did you work through those memories? How did you keep going? How did you keep moving forward?
Thankfully, um, I absolutely believe in divine intervention through people.
Mm,
God put a lot of people in my life who steered me in the direction I needed to be steered.
mm,
Um, my very first guide in the program, she was also an alcoholic. The first program I went into was for food, and I couldn't admit that at that point that I was an alcoholic because my dad was an alcoholic and I hated him. So if I admit this, then I'm gonna have to hate myself. And so but I could admit the food problem because I knew that my whole life. I knew there was something really wrong with me because no, people didn't eat the way that I did. Like I watched people and they didn't eat the way that I did. So I knew there was something really wrong with me there. So I had no trouble admitting that. And so when she said to me, there's no sugar in your food plan now. We have to take because sugar's the addictive substance. And I said, okay, and we were talking about that. And she said, so that means you can't drink any alcohol because alcohol has sugar in it. And it's just bad. It's not going to help you. And so I said, oh, well, I have no problem with alcohol. And that's not my problem. Well, within a year of being clean, okay, so I was clean. I had put the sugar down, which meant I put the alcohol down. So I was sober, but I was what you would call stark raving sober. I mean, I was a crazy person. And this is where I say God put the people in my path, because this woman happened to also be in the program for alcoholics as well. But she never told me that. But she could see all the behaviors, all the attitudes, all the things I was saying. She could see it. And she started asking me questions about it. And she sent me to a counselor who was a certified addictions counselor. And she said, he's going to be able to help you with these childhood issues that I can't help you with because I'm not a trained counselor. And one of the first things he did with me is he asked me all the questions that you would ask an alcoholic. And he said, answer these questions as if you hadn't put the food down yet. And when I answered them, I passed the test with flying colors. And he said, I really think you need to start going to those meetings for the alcoholics, because until you admit this, you're not going to be able to move beyond it. And I'm not kidding you. This is how stubborn I was. I went to meetings for over a year before I was willing to admit. I was like, I am not going to admit this. But once I did, and I started doing that work with him, that's how I didn't pick up that, because in that work that I was doing about my childhood, I had gone to counseling before, but no one had ever really got into the basement with me and just excavated the crap out of my childhood. And that's what this guy did. He was very, kind and compassionate, but also really truthful about what he saw. He put me right into a women's therapy group, and I was working with other people, and it was all about community and just laying into the truth of who we really were. And this was not easy. This was hard. This was 4 years of my early recovery that it literally wiped me out emotionally, but it cleared the way for the spiritual life to begin, for the spiritual life to truly begin. And I'm just I look back at that time and I think, wow, God, you so know what you're doing by who you put in my path, because I know me, and the fact that I actually listen to these people, that's a miracle on its own. And I started writing again, and that also helped, because I had turned my writing off for a long time. And so I started writing again, and that also helped me. I would just go to writing, or, I just followed direction. I followed direction, and I did what everybody told me to do. Because I was just so tired of feeling tired and sick of myself all the time, and I had a little bit of glimmer of hope when I talked to these people, because they were relatively happy. And I thought, how are they doing this? How do you put down sugar and still be happy? That makes no sense to me. Or never. I mean, I went into recovery in 1999. Are you kidding me? I'm not going to have alcohol on New Year's Eve, 1999. What kind of crazy person am I that I chose? Because I didn't choose that time. God chose that time for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, it sounds like you really did let go and let God. I can really feel that in your story.
Yeah.
So how did the process of actually writing this book change you, personally, spiritually, or professionally? Becoming an author is a big deal for a lot of people. How has it impacted you?
Well, it was my second book. My first book was a daily devotional that I did, that I finished actually right It got published right when I started seminary. So I was about 15 years sober when I did that.
Mm.
And that was a great experience because my spiritual mentor at the time, he was the chaplain where I worked, and he was on the receiving end of each one of those entries. And so I had somebody who was really supporting me um, and was also a man of the cloth. And I actually was able to trust him in a time when I was not involved in organized religion. And so that helped me to get a little closer to, it's again, God put this person in my life. This particular book, though, I think the thing about it, how it changed me was it made me recognize that, the story in the Bible about, and I can't remember exactly which gospel it's in. I think it's in more than one, where the rich guy comes to Jesus and says, what do I have to do to follow you? And Jesus asks him if he's kept the commandments and all that stuff. And he's like, yes, yes, I've done all those things. And then Jesus says, okay, there's one other thing you need to do. Sell everything you have, give it away to the poor, and then you can follow me. And he goes away sad, right? Because he can't do that. He can't give up his possessions. He can't give up who he is in order to follow Jesus. And when I was writing the book, I recognized this is more about carrying a message than being a message.
Mm.
This is more about sharing God's word with people so that they can get closer to him than being revered or than having my graduation day or all those things that used to put a block between me and God because of my pride or my ego or, whatever that thing was that was in my way. Um, my jealousy of other people who were authors. How come I can't get an agent? This person gets an agent. How come I can't? Why doesn't anybody like my stuff online? Like all those things that I was so worried about, and now I'm just kind of like, look, if God wants this to get into somebody's hands, he's going to get it into that person's hands. And it's not for me. It's again, I go back to The Chosen again. The creator of that show named his company 5 and 2 for 5 loaves and 2 fish because he recognized that he was trying to feed the world with himself, and he realized all I have to do is make the product and put it out there, and God will multiply it. And that's what I recognized while I was writing this book, and especially when I was trying to get it published and trying to find a publisher, because anybody who's ever done that knows it's just like you just get rejected or you get just ignored completely, and it's brutal. It's a brutal process. And I just had to trust that when the time was right, if this was God's plan, it was going to happen. And it did. And the book that I am currently working on, or that I just finished, actually, I just found a publisher. It took about a year. And again, it was the same kind of process where I just kept doing the next thing, sending out the next query letter, whatever it happened to be, and just saying, all right, God, whatever you got in store for this, you take it from here, and letting it go. And every time, everything I really need to know about how to live my life, I've learned from early recovery. Every time I get in my head about something, I call somebody, or I pray, or I go to a meeting, or I got to get out of my head. Because when I'm in there trying to create outcomes, it just never ends well. It's
It gets
just
messy.
not
Get
good.
messy up there. Yeah. I can relate to
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
I would love to just jump into your publishing process a little bit. Sounds like you got a more traditional publisher.
Actually, the Higher Powered was published by what you would call a small house publisher or an independent publisher. And I actually found him after sending it out to so many places and getting rejected or ignored, like I said. Um, a friend of mine said, I'm following this guy. He's somewhat of a meditation guru, and he said, um, I realized that he has his own little publishing house because he writes a lot of books and he publishes books on transformational spirituality.
Mm.
And he said to me, why don't you send him your book? And because I had talked to him about it several times. And I said, well, if he's doing transformational spirituality, he's probably not that interested in a Jesus story, because a lot of people who are, in the meditation realm are, they're not into Christian literature or anything like that. And he goes, oh, no, give it a try. See what he says. He had the book for 3 months and I thought, it's probably like I sent it to him and I said, my friend told me to reach out to you. And after 3 months, I thought, yeah, it's probably not going to happen. And within like 2 weeks of that, I can't remember the exact timing, but he got in touch with me. He's like, I just got to read your book. I'm sorry it's taken so long. I love it. Let's do it. This is awesome. And I was shocked. I was absolutely shocked that he wanted to do it. And he was his assistant did all the cover design and it was absolutely perfect. I told her a few things like that I was thinking about and she just took it and ran with it. Again, I think it was divine intervention where God just said, these are the people who are going to take care of this particular product, and it didn't, I mean, it's been just over a year and it's not doing like enormous sales or anything like that. But what it did for me, and I believe there's still a purpose for it. I believe there's still more to happen here. It got me in touch with, I just recently had a YouTube conversation with a teacher, a spiritual teacher who I've wanted to talk to for a long time about this idea. And it took a year, but we finally had the conversation. And it was it's a lot of this is about patience and trust, you know. Yes, there are certain things that I need to do. Like I need to go online and try to have my presence known on social media and all those things I don't like doing, all those techie things I don't like to do, marketing myself. I don't like those things, but I need to do those, right? But I also need to trust God, pray, and keep doing the next thing, and the next thing was to write the next book, which I did, and started to put out in feelers for a publisher and wanted to go with a more traditional Christian um, setup somehow and started sending it out to the biggies, like Tyndale and Thomas Nelson, the ones that usually do Christian publishing. And found in that, because I actually also in the process of this, sorry, I'm backing up a little bit. I tried to find an agent because I thought an agent will help me, Every agent I reached out to said, until you have somewhere between 2,000 and 20,000 followers online or sales, no agent is going to pick you up. And I just was so depressed when I heard that. Because I thought to myself, I'm like, yeah, but you don't understand. I need your help to get there. Like, how do I get there? So I just started again, sending out query letters. And in the process, I found out that Thomas Nelson has a hybrid publishing arm, which I had never heard of, a hybrid publisher. It's kind of like self-publishing, because you do have to put some money into it. Like they're not just doing all of it for you, but you get now the Thomas Nelson name behind your book, which is huge. I mean, that is for anybody who knows Christian literature, that Thomas Nelson been publishing Bibles since the 1700s, so that's definitely big, but they also will hopefully that will put me in a spotlight to have agents find me, that there's that possibility. And maybe not, but it gives me more of a presence in the field, and that's where I want to write. That's the kind of stuff that I want to write. So how is it? It's really made me sort of step outside of my comfort zone, and do some things that I don't like doing, or ask for help in places that I feel maybe stupid or silly about it. And recognize that, nobody knows what they're doing, really. I mean, unless they're in the business their whole life, most people really have no idea what they're doing. And it's okay to ask for help and ask questions and all those things that or at least that I have kept myself from doing things because I'm afraid of looking a certain way or whatever. I think too, I'm also to the age where I don't care anymore. I I will say that growing older is a beautiful thing in that one thing is that I really don't care anymore about a lot of things I used to care about, silly things that kept me from stepping outside, and doing the next thing.
Yeah, that sounds like liberation. And yeah, congratulations. I did see the cover for Higher Power. They did do a really good job with that. And
Yeah.
excited. We'll talk a little bit more if you're open to it about the new book. But I'd love to ask this question. Resilience, it tends to show up differently for everyone. Sometimes it's discipline. Maybe in your case, it's faith. Sometimes it's community. What does resilience look like for you these days?
I love that you use the word discipline because discipline is something that, I shied away from for a long time because it was used in a very different way when I was growing up, the word. Um, Self-discipline for me has actually been one of the greatest gifts I've ever given myself. And I believe it is where my resilience comes from because uh, and it really started when I got into recovery because there's a lot of self-discipline needed to stay clean and follow direction, especially for someone who's spent her whole life rebelling against those things. And so at first, that's where it started for me. But then when I decided to go to school, and was working full time, in order to keep doing those things that helped me to stay sober, I had to start getting up at very early hours,
Mm,
and I really like my sleep. And so I had to really discipline myself in order to do those things, like get up at 4 o'clock in the morning in order to have an hour with my higher power before I left for work or before I left for school or whatever I was doing that day. And now, today, what that looks like is I left my traditional job a year ago. I have a wonderful husband who said, you know, you're never gonna, this is never gonna happen if you don't just put your whole self into it.
mm,
And it just happened to be a really bad time where I was working. Things were not going well. Lots of people were getting fired around me or people were leaving. And so I took him up on the offer. And he said to me, he said, I want to I want to retire when I'm 65, which was at that point 3 years away. And he said, "So if you promise me you'll either be rich or have health insurance by then, um, that's all I care about. I want to make sure that you have health insurance." And I said, "Okay." And so why is that important? For several reasons. One, I am accepting his offer. I'm accepting help from someone else. I'm not being pigheaded about, yes, there are times when I really wish that I could be, providing some financial support to our marriage. But I also know that part of being married is helping each other to get to the places we're supposed to be in our lives. And that was something I could never have done, even in early recovery, because I was so set on not being a sponge, anymore. And I recognize that I'm not being a sponge. I'm just being somebody in a partnership. And but where the discipline still comes in is that I still get up, even though I don't have to punch a clock, go to a job, all deal with traffic, all that stuff. I still get up at 4 o'clock in the morning
yeah,
to spend time with God when it is that quiet, because that's the thing I have discovered in all of this, that my time with God is the most important part of my day.
mm,
And when the alarm goes off today, I don't go, "Ugh," When the alarm goes off today, I go, oh, I get to go be with God for a couple hours, and it's turned from discipline to it's absolute joy to do it. And seriously, if you had told me this 15 years ago, I would have rolled my eyes at you and said, you're crazy. I am not going to be excited about getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning. But it's what happens, for me anyway, when I surrender what my selfishness wants to what the healthy me wants, okay, which is following God and living cleanly and living good, it becomes what I want. I don't know if that makes sense, but that is what self-discipline has done for me. It has taken me to a place where the things that are good for me are the things I actually want today.
I'm just gonna take that in. You said a lot there. Sounds like you and your husband have created something really special. That's really cool that space has been created, and yeah,
Yeah. That
It-
took a lot of work,
it's a
but yeah,
process. I'm sure.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm. A lot of the listeners of this podcast are aspiring writers and authors, and they have stories, but a lot of them haven't started yet. What's something you'd say to someone who feels, called to write, but maybe they feel stuck, maybe they've stopped and started, but they're not sure they're ready. Any insights on just how to get things moving?
Uh, for me, it was really helpful for me. And I think I did mention this on both the books that I have published. I had someone that I asked to help me by being on the receiving end of the things that I was writing.
Mm.
Like when I was really serious about, yeah, you know what? I do want to do this. I had this project in mind, whatever it was, or, whatever it is for each person. And I needed to find someone that I trusted. And it really did happen sort of organically both times. Um, but it was helpful to me because I needed to be accountable to someone other than myself. And neither one of them really, I mean, my thesis advisor did do some critical editing for me in regards to, Bible stuff that I was talking about. So he was really helpful there. But in the first situation, the chaplain didn't even really, he would let me know, like I'd send him the entry on an email and he would let me know he received it, and then he'd let me know he read it. But he didn't really say too much. I mean, there was maybe like one or two that he had some big feedback on. But for the most part, he really was just a sounding board. And, that can make a huge difference for somebody who's struggling to do it every day, because that's the key for me, was that I was doing something every day. I was writing something every day, even if it was only just a couple of sentences. I was committed to the process every day, because then it becomes a habit, and then it becomes part of your makeup. You are an author already. You don't have to be published in order to call yourself that.
Yeah, it's like brushing your teeth. You
Exactly.
get into the rhythm. Absolutely.
Yes. Yep.
So, Jessica, before we close, I would love to know just what you're up to now. You kind of hinted at a new book, but like, what are you working on? Any other projects? Any creative adventures? What are you excited about now?
Yeah, yeah. The one that is with the publisher now, it's called Sunbathing, Sunbathing,
Mm.
basking in the Word of God, and it's meditations on things Jesus said. But what I've done is created like an almost an interactive devotional, where at the end of each, one of the things I love about different devotionals that I read is when the author will ask you a meditative question at the end of their devotion. And so that's what I did. I set it up so that there would be a prompt for the reader at the end of each thing, whether it was a meditation prompt, a writing prompt, a study prompt, um, so that the reader could really dive into the scripture as opposed to just listening to what I have to say. because when you go to church and you hear the preacher talk and you think, oh, this is great, but you have questions, or and you don't get to talk to the preacher after. Like, this is a situation where if you have questions, you can take it into the writing prompt or the meditation prompt, and you can take those questions to God. So that's what that is. I'm also working on I've been blogging poetry since 2017. I love writing poetry. It just sort of flows through me. It's one of those things where I recognize that God has given me a beautiful gift of communicating with him.
Mm.
And the collection that I'm putting together now, I actually have a working title for it called "This Is How God Speaks to Me," because one of the things I've noticed about it is that I date all my work, and as I'm going through all these different poems since 2017, which is quite a few years ago now, I'm reading things from 2017, 2018 that are really wise.
Mm.
And I know I was not that wise back then. Like, I know that that's God speaking through me.
Mm.
And so that's what I'm working on that now, putting that together. I have a couple ideas in my brain. I wrote a short story that was a historical fiction short story when I was in seminary, on the Levite's concubine, which is a very sort of random story from the book of Judges, that a lot of people don't talk about. You probably never heard about it in church because it's an ugly story. It's a really ugly story. But the female in the story doesn't have a name. She's just referenced through the whole story as the Levite's concubine.
Mm.
And so I took the story and I wrote a historical fiction story about it. I gave her name, and I gave her a backstory as to why she became a concubine and all that kind of stuff. And I remember at the end of that class, the professor said, I want you to write a 1-page so what, meaning, what are you going to do with what you've learned about studying this? And I basically said, I said, someday I'm going to write a collection of short stories for all the women in the Bible who don't have names.
Mm.
And give them all names and give them backstories. And maybe that's why I love The Chosen so much, because they're doing, they're giving some historical fiction accounts to give plausible stories to what the disciples might have been going through, or what their life might have been like before they met Jesus, or after, who knows where they're going to go from here. But I really think that we all are we all are connected to the people in the Bible in ways that we really don't explore enough. And I think with writing this, I think that may be the next thing I do, because I'm talking about it now. There are a couple different things I have in my head, so I'm not sure, but that one is near and dear to my heart because it was the first paper I ever wrote for seminary, and it sticks here a lot.
Mm. Mm. Well,
So we'll
definitely,
see.
sounds like you have
Yeah,
enough on your plate to keep the wheels turning for a little bit at least.
yeah,
We'll have to
absolutely.
maybe circle back and talk about the new projects once you get them out in the world. I
Oh, I'd love it. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, it'd be fun. So I'd love to invite you into the lightning round. I have 5 questions. You just speak from your heart. We'll just go through them and see what comes out.
Okay.
All right. So what's one book that changed your life?
Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
Mm,
If you've never read it, read it. It's awesome.
yeah, that's powerful. If you could have dinner with any author, past or present, who would it be?
Dean Koontz,
Mm. When it comes to getting ideas out, are you more of a talker or a writer?
writer.
Finish this sentence. Writing my book taught me to.
Be patient.
In one word, what does resilience mean to you?
Perseverance.
Mm. Well done, Jessica. So this is, I like to call this the final chapter. If you could leave one piece of advice or encouragement with our listeners, something that they'll carry with them long after this episode, what would it be?
It's never too late. Whatever it is for you, whether it's, you know, getting clean from an addiction, getting married, writing a book, changing careers, whatever it is that you've been thinking about, and you start to think, I'm too old, I can't do that. It's never too late.
Mm. I love that. Such a great reminder. Before we wrap up, Jessica, where can people find your book and follow your journey?
Everything you need to know about me is on my website. It's very easy, jessicalmorris.com. My books are there, information. I'm a spiritual director, so there's information about that there. You can subscribe to my blog and get my poetry in your email inbox if you want. And I do other ramblings sometimes on occasion when I get excited about something. But everything is there. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent, Jessica. Well, thank you for sharing a piece of your heart today. This was a lot of fun. And yeah, I would love to follow up maybe in a few months once your next project is out to talk about it.
That'd be great. It's been an honor to be with you, Carrie.
Excellent. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Resilient Author Podcast. I hope today's conversation gave you both inspiration and practical tools for your own journey. If you've been carrying the idea for a book, but haven't started, or you started and feel stuck, I'd love to invite you to join my 5-day Speak Your Book Challenge. In just 5 days, you'll speak the outline of your first draft and discover how to turn it into a finished manuscript and a published book. You can join anytime at voicetobook.co/challenge. Until next time, keep going, stay resilient, and remember, your story matters.